Hey everybody, welcome back to new videos channel, and today we're looking to 5 overlooked Vue features that you might know yet or forgot about it again. So let's take a look. Here we go. Before we dive into the features, of course, these are all features that have been out for a while, but well, maybe you forgot that they exist because they've been out for a little bit, or they're so brand new that you, well, didn't read all the changelogs and release notes, because to be fair, none of us is reading all of them. Yeah, me neither. In this case, obviously, these videos might help. And after watching the video and thinking, oh, there is a feature that, I don't know, you might have heard about it, but you don't know a use case for it, be it in Vue or Next. Or you wonder, okay, there is something. Write it down in the comments. Maybe I'll make a video about explaining that. I have a few things on the list, also core Vue functionalities that you might not know much about it, like define expose, but these are not part of this video. That's for another one. Without further ado, let's jump into the very first feature we're taking a look at, props destructuring. And of course, to demo the feature, we have an application. It is up and running. It's a plain Vue application, and it is, well, not as minimal as possible, but almost. This actually comes out starter when you run pnpm create Vue at latest and then run through the setup. And I modified a few components here and there to make sure it's not that bulky. So we have almost no CSS included. We see a ref here to put on a message and a logo, and something like a version from the package.json that seems like the Vue version. And if we look at the browser, then we see that's absolutely correct. We have the Vue version down here, which is set to 3.4.0, which is not the latest version, of course, when you're watching this video. Definitely not. But of course, I want to showcase what the feature looks like without having it and then with having it. And here we have some two-way data binding, right? We can type some things in, that all works. Hello, YouTube. And we're fine. Now, let's look into components and see what is actually happening under the hood. In the first parts, we see the Vue version rendered out down here, and we have the input field over there with a v-model. And then that message is passed into the hello world component. So here is where the magic happens. And to be fair, it's not that much magic, right? We define our props and we destructure them. So that seems kind of okay, right? Definition, structuring, then we rendered it out and we've seen that works. And we also have a watch effect. So far it seems like, yeah, you can just destructure your props and everything works, right? No, not right. Let's check the browser again and see what doesn't work right now in 3.4.0. If we actually change the text, we see this is updating, but you remember we had a watch effect in there. If we fully refresh the page though, then we see, okay, hello Vue 3 and Vite is triggered, but whenever we change things, nope, nothing happens. So why exactly is that the case? Well, if you've seen my reactivity transform video, then you know already about it. If not, check it out and find out why we have to write .value for probably forever when using Vue. But nevertheless, in Vue 3.4 and earlier, we didn't have a feature such as props destructuring, because in general, with reactive objects, you should not destructure them, otherwise they lose reactivity. So let's quickly fix the code and then see why it does work right now in Vue 3.5 and after. To update our code, well, we should stop destructuring the props here and just write props over here, and then also update message to props.message. We don't have to update our template actually, because message is inferred, but writing props.message would also work. That's not wrong because, well, we expose props here. By the way, if you're curious if it's better to write with or without the props in the template, let me know. I might make a video about it if you're interested. But coming back to the application, if we now write stuff, we see, okay, the console is full of the things and it works properly. So let's revert all the changes and destructure our props again and then upgrade to 3.5 and see what will happen then. All right, as you see, everything has changed back to how it was. And now we jump into the browser and we see Vue version 3.5.13 is used, that newest at the time of recording. And then if we write things just work. So things don't break anymore. And that's because of, well, the props destructuring change. It wasn't experimental for a while, so even in 3.4 you could just enable it by switching a flag. And there was an RFC around that, also a link to that in the show notes if you're interested in that. And that's basically the leftover of the whole reactivity transform proposal. So you can now say, okay, I destructure props and use them nicely again. And what happens under the hood is that the compiler will basically smartly replace all the occurrences to make sure that reactivity is kept. So a lot of compiler magic there. And if you think, okay, that doesn't seem super transparent, it's not really opaque, then wait for it. I have something very interesting to show you if using VS Code. Let's go to the settings of VS Code that are open right here by either using the command panel or just pushing command comma or control comma. And then we have a lot of options here. Actually, a lot of them are enabled by default. And what we want to enable is inlay hints, the structured props. You can also have a lot of other inlay hints. They're really, really helpful. And here, for example, we see, okay, look, if we go back to hello world, then here we have this inlay hint saying, okay, that's from props.message. So we know it comes actually from the props and it is read-only, which is important. Another thing that is a bit of a restriction is when you use a watch to, for example, watch a prop, then with this destructuring, what you can't do is you can't just pass it in as an argument because that will fail. Instead, you need a getter function that's reactive, as you would do when you use props.message. So that's necessary, otherwise things will break. And the great benefit of the code that we have right here is, well, let me show you there. You can even set a default. If there is no message for whatever reason passed, then you don't have to use with defaults or any other, let's say, less elegant solution. So you can even set the defaults for props out of the box here. Great, right? So if you've missed that, use it now, because why not? And we're not that far away from the second feature I want to show you. That's also a very simple one. And it's about the prop shorthand. When we now go to our app.vue, we have this hello world :message equals message. And this part is the interesting one, because in plain JavaScript, if you create an object, let's say const object equals, then you can say version:version. But commonly you use the shorthand, which is just if the name of the key and the value are the same, you can just omit it and use version, for example. And I remember when I joined the Vue community and used Vue more and more, there was a big discussion of like, hey, can we basically do the same with props? And a lot of people say like, okay, it's too opaque, it's not really clear. But eventually this was added. So if you have props that actually have, and it's very common, a ref or reactive with the same name, you can just omit that part and it's fine. And here you even see another of the inlay hints that you might have seen before, also configurable through the Vue extension. So you even see what it equals to, but you don't have it in the code. That might also help, especially beginners getting into that if they're not aware of that, or people catching up or coming from Vue 2 and so on and so on. So it's a really nice feature. It keeps things very short and makes sure your code is not too verbose. Also, as it's shown there, you can fully disable that over here by inlay hints vbind shorthand, disabling that, and that's gone, or activated if you wanted. All right, and the next feature you want to take a look at is, drumroll please, mixin. No, I'm kidding, of course not. We take a look at vbind and CSS. Here we go. And to take a look at that, we don't need the hello world component anymore. Instead, we use the CSS color component, which we will quickly import, clean up the import here, and we're all good. And what is happening now? Well, we haven't seen the components, so maybe we should just dive into that real quick. And we have it here. It's very simple. We have a pretty small script setup with like, well, 2 lines in there. If you want to have the empty line, that's all fine. And we have color. It holds a ref, for example, blue. And then we have a div with a class color box and say this box is styled with vbind and CSS. We'll see it in a second. And down here, we have some selections. So what will actually happen in the browser with this? In the browser, we see that the box is styled with vbind and CSS and has the background color blue. And if we click on one of the buttons, well, it changes. But how's it possible? We didn't see any class or style declaration in the template, right? And the answer is the style block. So let's just jump right in there. And we see in that scope style block here, doesn't have to be scope, but of course it's better. So the style is actually only applied to that component. We have the .colorbox class from above, and we see background color to vbind color. So we can actually bind a ref here to change the value whenever necessary. So if we take a look at the code in the browser, let's see how this is actually implemented. The implementation is actually pretty cool. It uses CSS variables. So we see over here, the component, we have this style, and then the ID of the component is also used for the data v attribute, and then the name of the CSS variable, in this case color, set to blue. So it's based on the ref. Great. And the color box class, well, it just binds that variable. And whenever we change things from blue to green to purple, we also see that style changing. So Vue is automatically applying a value as a CSS variable, and we don't have to think about naming or generation or whatsoever. So that comes in pretty handy. I mean, unless you use Tailwind CSS. Though even there in Tailwind CSS 4, more and more CSS variables are used, so that could still be pretty useful. Nevertheless, I think it's a great thing, especially you can not only bind colors, you can bind values, anything you want technically. So that's a lot of fun, and maybe you didn't know that one yet. So let's jump in to the next one, which is useTemplateRef. And to showcase this, we of course once again get rid of the CSS color component. That was great while it lasted, and we add the low level component. Let's call it, because we kind of access a lower level, like the actual node, the actual DOM node with useTemplateRef. But let's go there and take a look. So we have a very simple component here once again, no big script setup part. We have ref, we set up a video ref and a status, and we have a play function that apparently says, hey, somewhat whatever contains that in the ref that should be played, right? And we also see it should be HTML video element because, well, that's how it's typed. In our template, we have exactly that. We have a video muted by default. It's a ref, video ref, okay, some source, great, and then a play button and a status. Let's see how that will look like in our browser. And it is exactly as we described in browser. And if you push the play button, well, then it's playing. Awesome. But now you might wonder, okay, there's no useTemplateRef. So we just define a ref and is that it? Not exactly. In version 3.5, since then, you can use useTemplateRef and it's way better than just defining a normal ref. Why that? Let's see it in the code. And of course, the first thing you have to do is to actually replace the naive implementation with what's possible now. And to do this, well, we just use useTemplateRef. And the best part is, here we see straight away, oh, it already recognizes the video ref down from how we named it here. If we name it differently, like, I don't know, then we actually get an error here saying, oh wait, this doesn't exist here. And we would get some, well, TypeScript errors, which is amazing. So less runtime errors. So we can just do this. And if we take a look now, we don't even have to manually type things because right away it says HTML video element. It can just infer that because, well, the ref is set here in that video tag. Perfect. And now everything is usable as before. Now I wonder, okay, wait, is that it? That's all? Not exactly. You have another big benefit, and that's especially true in a bigger application or when using composables, inline composables, and so on and so on. Also about inline composables, take a look at the video if you haven't already. Really good and important concept. But think about that. Right now, beforehand, you would have to define your template refs always top level. So you couldn't say, oh, there's a template ref that's maybe defined through a composable and then passed somewhere. No, you always would have to pass them. And with useTemplateRef, that's not a problem because now you can say, okay, I define this thing as a template ref inside somewhere and then pass it out to other composables, to other functions. So it's even more composable than before, even besides all the TypeScript goodies and benefits. So all in all, a great change, not too big, but it gives better developer experience and doesn't hurt. So if you have template refs out there, you know exactly what to do. Use templateRef. And well, seems like we're almost done here. There's one more thing, if I would remember what it is. Right, v-memo. And once again, we got rid of the older component from before and just add our new component, and it's just named list. You might wonder, okay, list is not the perfect name here, and that's of course true. We might have to import that manually, but that's fine. Usually you should use multi-word components unless you have, for example, Nuxt with that structure that uses the prefixes of the folders as component names, then you're also good to go. But otherwise, don't do it like that and use multi-word components for real. But back to list component. Let's have a look here. And it's a bit more complicated than before, but it's not a problem. I'll go through it real quickly. So we have a simple to-do list component in a way. We have our items here by default. They have an ID, a name, and we can set them to important, true, false, whatsoever. Let's just set it to false. It doesn't matter. Or we can even leave it. And then we have another part down here. Show only important. It's a ref following Boolean. And based on that, we get the items, either everything, or if we only want the important ones, then we filter them out. And next, we have things to add stuff. So we have the current ID, right? Based on the length. Not ideal, but in this case, it should work fine. And we have the add item function to just say, hey, add a new ID, new name, and set it to important one way or another. And then we have totally unrelated a counter. So you will see why exactly that's the case. And that's more or less everything. The template is showing all the things. So let's quickly jump into how that will look like in the browser. And here we go. We can add items. That all works. We can add the counter, and we see the counter everywhere increases, right? The counter is available for all these items, and it's always the same. That's very important, and we can filter them. And now we haven't used v-memo so far, but you might wonder, first of all, why do you need it? And the answer is, you probably don't. But it's still good to know about it. Because if you have bigger applications where you want to have, let's say, fine-grained performance improvements, that's something where v-memo can come in pretty handy. Otherwise, well, Vue's VDOM is pretty fast, and with Vapor Mode coming very soon, you don't even need v-memo anymore. Actually, it's not even implemented there because it's so fast, it's not necessary and wouldn't even give any benefit with the new like fine-grained rendering technique. Nevertheless, in the VDOM, you might want to say, okay, there's a certain part of the DOM, and I only want to update that part when certain dependencies, so like refs, computers, and so on, change. That can be extremely useful when doing, well, big things with data tables or data visualization, everything where you render a ton of data and don't want to let Vue handle the update, but saying, hey, Vue, I'll tell you when to update, it's fine. If these things change, do it, otherwise spare your time, it's okay. So with the simple list, it doesn't give any huge performance improvements. Nobody will care because the API call will be way slower to actually fetch the data or send them. But still, I want to show how it works in case you need it. And to do so, we have this list element that's rendering over v4 and want to apply v-memo to that. The style, actually, we don't even need that. It's fine. And it's important to say that you can also use v-memo on any kind of element. You don't have to use it on an li or like in a v4. It also works just for certain parts, but with a v4, it's easier to showcase. And what we want to do is we want to set v-memo. And in here, you can define an array of dependencies. So here you could say, okay, this v-memo depends on, well, the name of the item and if the item is important or not. And if any of that changes, well, then we actually want to update the whole thing, right? So we more or less say, look, this selection down here, so this here is only updated when some properties change. And that can be because, well, maybe in a certain case, values change because you get filtered out and filtered back. So there's actually the elements down here change because it's reordered, because it's sorted, whatsoever. So let's see how this looks like in the browser. And what we can do is we can toggle the filter. How do we actually know that something's re-rendered? Well, I'll show you. I'll click this counter here, and we didn't really add the counter to the dependencies. So in an actual application, that would be a mistake because we want the counter to be updated. Right now, it's not because we said, hey, don't change that part down here unless the state or the ID changes, right? So until it's like sorted, whatsoever. And that's not really happening at all because the counter is not part of dependencies. If we would quickly add that, let's do this and say, look, counter is already in here. Then we basically say, okay, just update when this is happening. And if we go back to the browser, then that's actually the case and things update as before. But that's not the whole point of the showcase. So let's remove the counter again and we can refresh and see what's happening instead. So now back to before, nothing changes. If I add an item though, we see, oh yeah, that item is newly rendered. I can increase the counter, it still stays the same. If I filter things, well, obviously, okay, things are changing. Items are added and removed from the list, so that will be rendered. But you also see that this one up here, because it's the first one, it's set to important, it will never change. And it will never change because, well, it's the first one on the list, no value changes. And if you filter things and the first one is in there, it won't update. So also there, the counter will always stay at 0, even if we add new items or do this again and again. The counter of the others changes because they're added again to the computer property and be removed. So they're also added to the template and also removed from the template. That's all fine. But besides that, yeah, that's it. So v-memo can also be a foot gun. You have to be very careful when using it. And as I said, most of the times you don't need it. If there are certain performance considerations, you might consider it though. Okay, and here we are. These are 5 overlooked Vue features. Some you might never have to use and some you're like, oh, how can I live without that? Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Also check out the latest Stage Vue episode where Michael and I talk with Jan-Niklas Wortmann about IDEs, being a DevRel, and much more. And well, hope to see some of you next week at Vue.js Amsterdam online. Let me know all the things in the comments and see you soon. Happy hacking.